My name is Andrew Stinson. I'm a senior consulting engineer with Firefly, and we're working through our software-defined access series, and today we're talking about the group-based access control policies. We're going to talk about what group-based access control policies are, how they are created, and how we use them within our fabric. When we talk about group-based access control policies, the first thing we want to talk about is our security groups, or scalable groups, you'll also hear them called. These groups represent a collection or a container for endpoints within our fabric. Now, what do we mean? Within our fabric, we are going to have one or more user virtual networks assigned to it. In this case, we have a corporate virtual network. Scalable groups that we create are going to be assigned to a virtual network. In this case, we have an employees and a contractors scalable group. Now, we define these groups based on what our policy enforcement requirements are for these groups of endpoints. Now, when an endpoint authenticates and joins our network, we're going to assign it an scalable group tag, or an SGT. In this case, we'll have endpoints that authenticate and are assigned the employees SGT, and some that are assigned the contractors SGT. Within our SGT, all endpoints are going to, by default, have full access to each other. And within our virtual network, all of the SGTs within that virtual network are going to have full access to each other as well. This is the default behavior for SD access. Because we have gone through and created these groups and we're assigning these endpoints to these groups, it allows us to use this as a micro-segmentation layer within our SDA fabric. For example, if we didn't want employees and contractor endpoints communicating with each other, we can create a contract that says to deny all traffic. And we'll create a policy referencing that contract that will block traffic for any endpoints that are part of the employees or the contractors scalable group. We can even go further and say that we don't want any contractor endpoints communicating with each other. And even though they're in the same scalable group, we can apply a policy referencing the same contract, denying all traffic between the endpoints within that scalable group. So, group-based access control is our micro-segmentation layer in our fabric. It gives us granular access control down to within the actual scalable group. Those security groups or scalable groups are containers for endpoints, and that can be assigned either statically through the host onboarding dashboard in our DNA Center management console, or through dynamic assignment with an ICE authorization profile. The security groups are assigned to one or more virtual networks, and they represent our policy boundary. And that access policy is what gets applied between SGT and SGT. That access policy is going to contain a contract. And that contract is going to have contents in it that lets us know what action to take on what application, with what protocol or port, if it's source or destination. It's basically our ACL. These contracts are reusable objects, so we can define a contract once and reuse it in multiple policies throughout our environment. So just as a quick comparison between our standard traditional IP ACLs and our security group ACLs, the IP ACLs are based on the IP addresses of the source or the destination. It can be any IP address, or we can represent a specific host or a range of addresses. Alternatively, the Security Group ACL is group-based. We're going to define our ACL based on group membership, not on their IP address. IP ACLs, when they get very large and you get a lot of hosts in an environment, you can have a very resource-intensive configuration in your systems. And the Security Group ACL uses less TCAM. It's not having to track the endpoints and assign ACLs to particular ports. It's just looking at group membership of the endpoints. IP ACLs can be very complex to create and manage. And in Security Group ACLs, because of the interfaces that we have available, we can very easily create these policies. They're easy to manage. We can take a quick look in the dashboard and easily see what's going on. IP ACLs get assigned to a port, either on ingress or egress, and the Security Group ACLs are assigned to groups, and the groups have endpoints assigned to them, so they don't directly apply to the endpoints. This allows endpoints to move around, and we don't have to reapply policy to the new port they've connected to. An example of our configuration is here on the left. We see an IP access list built permitting port 80 and port 20. And we would apply this to any port that we want to allow traffic in. Now, something to take note here is this any. This is where we're going to put the source and destination IP addresses. If this was an access list where we wanted to separate our employees and our contractors, we would have to have separate networks or track what IP addresses each of those groups are being assigned so that we can have a proper access list. That makes things very complicated. We also want to note that this access list, in order to function, has to be assigned to the interface. So if we have a host that moves to other interfaces, then we're going to have to move that configuration as well. This can be done dynamically with the DACLs, but it still has a strict focus on that being applied for whatever interfaces it needs to be applied to. Alternatively, when we take a look at our Security Group ACL, you can see that we're going to build the same ACL and permit the same ports. And these are our destination ports. And then we just have this one command here to say that we want to apply these permissions from 55 to 66. Now these numbers here, those are our scalable group tag numbers, and they're going to be the identifiers for, say, our employees scalable group and our contractor scalable group. So very easily we can just apply this one line, and we now have this access control list applied to all endpoints when they come into that environment automatically. We're now going to take a look at our environment. In DNA Center, we're going to head over to Policy and Group-Based Access Control. In the overview, we're going to see a breakdown of some information that DNA Center has collected about our environment, security groups, and ICE profiles. We'll look at this configuration later when we look at DNA Center and examining our environment when we're deploying ICE. We're going to click over on our Policies tab to just take a quick look at what the policies look like that I mentioned. You can see we have our scalable groups listed with our destination and our source, and this matrix that allows us to see what policies have been applied in which direction and where. We're going to come back to that in just a second. We're going to hop over here to our scalable security groups or scalable groups. They're the same thing. And we see we have multiple scalable groups created here. We're going to go ahead and just create a new one. And as you'll see, we just create a name. And the tag value is already assigned with whatever's available. You can change it if you need to, add our description, and then we can apply this to a specific virtual network. So I'm going to just apply this to our prod network. All scalable groups will be part of the default virtual network, which is created when DNA Center is deployed. You don't have to leave it in there if you don't want. It's just up to you. We're going to save, and that will create the security group. So we have the security group here, and we see we have the warning sign here that our sync is in progress. And we can see we've now synchronized. Now we don't have any policies applied to it yet, but this security group is now available for us to define policies. So we're going to hop over to our access contracts here, and I'm going to create a new contract. I'll just refresh my page here. Create a new contract, and that's what we're looking for. All right, we're going to create a new contract called My Demo Contract, and we are going to permit, and we are going to say that in this case, we're going to permit HTTP there it is. And we want to permit, say, FTP. There we go. All right. So that's all we have to do. Now we can add additional ones. We can include some denies. If we wanted to have something a little more advanced, then we can choose this advanced option down here. And this is where we can choose the specific protocol that we want to use and then assign specific destination and port IP addresses. So for example, instead of making 2 of these contents, I could say that I want to do an advanced and say we want to do for destination 80 and 21 or 20 like our previous example. Okay. We can enable logging if we want, and we can also set our default action. You see right now it's on permit, and I can just say that if we don't apply any of these contents to our traffic, then we're just going to deny traffic. I'm going to leave that at permit, and we can enable logging on the whole access contract if we want to. We're going to save that. I forgot my comma here. And get rid of my space. It didn't like my space. Okay, do a quick refresh. You see that we are syncing. Right, and we've finished synchronization. So we now have the rule, the contract, and we have one rule for port 80 and 20. You can see here. Now we want to create a policy. So to create a policy, we're going to head over here to the policies page, and we're going to see all of our SGTs. If we look down here, we see my demo SGT. And if I wanted to, say, apply this within the same scalable group, I can just go over to my demo SGT to my demo SGT. I can say that I want to enable this, or I want to disable the contract or monitor it. And then I'm going to choose the contract I just created. We're going to see the list of the content and the rules that were created for our contract. And we can do save now. Okay. The policy will be added, and you see it's a custom policy. Now it hasn't been deployed yet. If we wanted to deploy this, then what we would do is come over here, say deploy, and deploy now. We can also schedule a deployment if we need to. Okay, it's been successfully deployed. Now what it means when it says successfully deployed and when it says synchronization is that as part of the integration with ICE, DNA Center is managing the environment for SGT creation and policy creation. That option is set here under our overview when we do configuration. We can either have DNA Center manage it or we can have ICE manage it. Whichever one you choose, the other option is going to be read-only. So if we head over to our ICE Work Center and take a look at our TrustSec policies here, we're going to see the same matrix. Give some time to fill in here. I'm going to scroll down here and see the My Demo SGT to My Demo SGT, and you can see that we can take a look here and we can see the Security Group ACL, My Demo contract, and we see the ACEs that were created to permit 80 and 20. So that's what's happening, is that we create the policies within DNA Center. DNA Center sends that configuration to ICE, which creates the SGACL. ICE then will push that configuration to our environment if a switch has an endpoint that belongs to one of those groups. If I wanted to apply this same contract, say for BYOD to my demo SGT, then I can just simply choose the contract, change, and save. Now if we take a look here, we're going to come up to our BYOD, and we're not going to see that yet until it finishes its synchronization. Okay. It synchronized pretty quick, and then we can force a deployment if we needed to. Okay. Now, we perform this task and we can do all of this far in advance of deploying our fabric. Just remember that whenever we design our fabric, we're going to create our virtual networks. Then we're going to assign our SGTs to our virtual networks. And then when we create our fabric, we're going to go in and add the virtual networks to the fabric. When we add the virtual networks to the fabric, then we're telling the SD Access fabric that these are the groups that we're going to expect, and these are the policies that we're going to apply. And they're all going to be part of this virtual network, and they're going to have these Anycast gateways applied to them. They're going to be part of these subnets and so on. Now, the two ways that we can assign a scalable group is, first, we can do the host onboarding with a port assignment. So I can just pick an interface here and say that I've got a user device connected, and I'm connecting to my corporate, and I can choose my demo SGT here. And so any device that connects to this port will automatically be assigned to that SGT. Dynamically, we can come in to ICE and we can configure our policies. And in our authorization profile, we're going to be able to choose that scalable group. We'll even be able to choose the virtual network, the VLAN, and all of that, and choose the specific SGT. We'll talk about ICE in more detail as we do a series on ICE and configuring those policy sets and those authentication and authorization policies and profiles and all of that. That ends our demo for the scalable groups and access control policies within SD Access. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending.